Hey guys, welcome to lesson number 5. You can see the title of this lesson is Measuring Change Over Time, Foreign Policy Shifts and America's Evolving Role in the World. As always, I'd like to give you a breakdown of the order of things. First, we're going to go over the learning targets that this assignment hits. Second, we're going to explain what you're expected to be able to do by the end of this assignment. Then we're going to cover some key vocabulary necessary to understanding the assignment. Finally, we're going to walk through the assignment, post it in Empower, and complete an example, in this case document 1, so that you understand what to do and what level of work is expected of you to earn the 3.0. A 3.0 or above can be earned on this assignment for the learning target listed below. If you earn below a 3.0, you are required to revise the assignment and turn it in again. In this case, we're looking at cause and effect number 1, CE1. Analyze continuity and change in eras over U.S. history from 1877 to the present. This is the third and final assignment for this learning target. So the goals for this assignment. First, learners will be able to break down and summarize the main idea of primary sources, in this case speeches. Next, learners will be able to examine primary sources over time to explain how the United States' role in the world changed from 1796, that's the birth of the United States, to 2010, which is roughly the present. You can see that this is where we really hit that learning target. By explaining how our role in the world changed over time, you are explaining continuity and change in U.S. history. The final target that we're aiming for is for those seeking a 3.5 or a 4. Those students will be able to explain both when and why changes in the United States' role in the world happen. So before digging into this assignment and its requirements, let's dig into some important ideas and background information. There are 5 key ideas I feel you have to know in order to understand and complete this assignment. The first of those is going to be neutrality. Second, isolationism. Third is interventionism. Fourth is alliances and collective security. And finally, the fifth is arguments against alliances and collective security. So starting with neutrality, which can also be referred to as being neutral. That's to stay out of conflict or not pick or take sides. It looks like something in this picture where somebody is in the middle of 2 people. You don't really pick a side, you try to avoid conflict altogether. In the context of this assignment, it refers to not getting involved in wars and staying out of other countries' business. Next we have isolationism, which is related to the word isolation or isolationist. If you're an isolationist, it means that you stay out or avoid other countries' business or affairs. You might notice that this is really close to neutral or neutrality. Basically, isolationists are neutral. So as a country, you keep to yourself and you don't care about others or get involved in anything else. And you can see that in this Dr. Seuss cartoon here. During World War II, Dr. Seuss created a whole bunch of cartoons about neutrality and isolationism. Here you can see the United States represented by the bird with the hat with stars and stripes, and the bird is saying, "Ho-hum, when he's finished pecking down that last tree, he'll quite likely be tired." In this case, you can see in the background that there's a woodpecker represented by Nazi Germany. You can see that Nazi Germany has gone and sort of woodpecked and chopped down all these trees that represent different countries. In the cartoon, the United States doesn't really care. We're being isolationist. We're staying out of the conflict, and we're pretending by staying out of it that as soon as Nazi Germany is done tearing down the tree marked England, that he's just going to be tired and stop. The next term you need to know is interventionism, which can also sometimes be referred to as intervene or intervening. This is the exact opposite of isolationism. So if interventionism is the opposite of isolationism, that basically means that when you intervene, you get involved in the problems or fights of other countries. The purpose is to influence or make a situation go to your benefit. You generally don't get involved or intervene because you're a nice person. You see some kind of advantage in it. The classic example, at least in American history, is the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War is really a conflict between North and South Vietnam, and the United States intervenes or gets involved because it's to our benefit to have South Vietnam win and North Vietnam lose. The next term we're going to talk about is alliance or alliances and collective security. An alliance is essentially a group of countries that join together, usually but not always, to fight wars. There are such things as peacetime alliances where countries just generally work together. The purpose of an alliance is collective security. Collective security is the belief that you're stronger together than you are apart. It tends to make other countries think twice before attacking. The perfect modern example here is NATO. You can see that NATO here has about 27 countries involved in this alliance. And the idea is if a nation were to attack one of those 27 countries, the other 26 come and help them. It makes countries think twice before attacking one of them because they're not just fighting that country, but all 27. The other example I'm going to give you Star Wars fans is the Rebel Alliance. The Rebel Alliance is essentially an alliance or group of planets that are working together to defeat the Empire. Both NATO and the Rebel Alliance are excellent examples of alliance and collective security. So the last thing we really need to cover is arguments against alliances or collective security, right? So if collective security is the idea that you're stronger together than you are apart, why would anybody not want to be involved in an alliance? Well, first of all, there's a risk of conflict or wars that are not yours to fight. As soon as a country within your alliance goes to war, you're supposed to follow them because you made an agreement with them. You may have nothing to do with that fight or conflict. If you get involved in a war that's not yours to fight, you ultimately end up sending your soldiers, that is to say your sons, your fathers, and your brothers, to die for someone else's war. They can be really expensive. Somebody has to pay for the weapons and pay the soldiers' wages. And again, if you're getting involved in a fight that's not really yours, you're sending people to die and you're spending a lot of money that you don't really need to. The final criticism is that when you're in an alliance, you're seen as giving up your independence or freedom. Basically, you no longer have the choice if you want to get involved or not. You have to get involved to support your friend or your alliance member. So at this point, let's take a look at the directions and steps for completing this assignment. At this stage, we're going to switch to the assignment sheet. We'll start by going over the directions and expectations for a 3, 3.5, and a 4. Next, we'll go over some reading strategies and demonstrate the quality of work that's expected from you by completing a sample, in this case, document 1, which is kind of tougher. And then we'll finish off by showing you the rest of the document and the final part of the assignment at the end. All right. So once you go to Empower and open the sheet, it's going to open up in Google Docs and look like this. You should see that it has the same title of the assignment that we've been talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and read the directions, but for now I'm going to skip the 3.5 and the 4.0 part because we'll talk about those later. So the directions. Below are 7 documents from America's birth to the 2010s. Your task is to summarize the main idea of each document in the space provided. For each document, you are asked to explain how much change, if any, happens in terms of neutrality, which we've defined as not getting involved, staying out of others' conflicts. Once all documents have been broken down and explained, you will complete the assignment by writing a summary paragraph of about 7 to 8 sentences, explaining how America's role in the world changed over time. This is where we're going to stop and come back to the 3.5 and the 4 later. So what you can see here is some last-minute directions here. On the next page, you will find the first document completed as an example showing how detailed and specific your work should be. While the example below is complete, you can see and hear me work through this on this instructional video. Basically, if you don't want to rewatch the video, you have this sample in your sheet when you open it up. So the first document is President George Washington's farewell address, and this is from September of 1796. This is basically right after the United States gets its independence, and we're a very young country. So what we're going to do is we're going to read the document which is found in the box, and you can see that it's really just the parts we need and a short quote. Any word that's bolded and underlined are words that I thought might give some students some challenge, so you can see that all of those words are defined in the word bank to the right. Unfortunately, these words appear in the order that they appear in the reading, not alphabetically. So you can see that attachment appears first, and so attachment is first, and extraordinary is last, and so extraordinary is last. What we're going to do is we're going to go on ahead and read this document twice. I really encourage you to read it once, and then read it a second time to see how much of it you can pick up. But as good students, we're going to take a look at the questions and what we're expected to do first before we read the document. So you can see here that for this particular document, there are 5 questions. 3 of them are marked for a 3.0, and 1 is marked for a 3.5, and 1 for a 4.0. Let's go on ahead and take a look at these questions. So the first thing we have to do is summarize the main idea of George Washington's speech. The second thing is we have to identify what fear motivates or drives President Washington's point of view. The last thing that we need to do for a 3 is explain if and how the document shows a change in the United States' role in the world. If there is no change from neutrality, we're going to leave this box blank. So if you're aiming for a 3, you really need to fill out just these 3, and depending on what you arrive at, you may end up leaving this third box blank. For a 3.5, we have to identify what event, circumstance, or historical context, that is to say situation, surrounds the speech. And then for a 4, how does this event, circumstance, or historical context, that is to say situation, explain why George Washington says what he says in his farewell address? I'm feeling particularly challenging today, so I'm going to go on ahead and model all 5 of these, so for those of you wanting a 3.5 or a 4, you can see what you need to do. So now that we've taken a look at the questions, which by the way are all highlighted in yellow, let's go on ahead and read the document through first, just to kind of get a sense of it, and then we'll go through a second time and take a closer look. So this is a quote from George Washington's farewell address. "Attachment of one nation to another creates many evils. Developing alliances leads to participation in the fights and wars of others that are not our business. History and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most dangerous enemies of republican government. We should trade with other nations, but have as little political connection as possible. Why connect our future success with any part of Europe and entangle our peace and prosperity in the conflicts of European greed, competition, and benefit? We must steer clear of permanent alliances with any part of the world. We may create temporary alliances only in extraordinary emergencies." All right, so the first thing we need to do is summarize his main idea. So let's take a look at this. Attachment of one nation to another creates many evils. I think that might start to touch on his main idea a little bit, because he's basically talking about alliances here, right? When one nation ties themselves to another or attaches, that is to say connects or has a relationship, he's really talking about alliances here without saying the word alliance. So when one nation basically allies with another, it creates many evils. Developing alliances leads to participation in fights and wars of others that are not our business. And so you can see that he's levying one of those criticisms that we talked about of alliances, that you end up fighting other people's wars when they're not yours. History and experience prove that foreign influence, in this case, foreign is outside or not of your country, and influence is control. So history and experience prove that outside control is one of the most dangerous enemies of republican government. Republican government, if we look over here, is the system of government with representatives and the system of government used by the United States where people vote for representatives. So outside sort of control is dangerous to our kind of government, is basically what he's saying. He says that we should trade with other nations, but have as little political connection as possible. Political, according to the chart over here, says having to do with government. So we need to be as little involved with other governments as possible. Why connect our future success with any part of Europe and entangle, that is to say, become twisted or tied together, our peace and prosperity, which basically means success, in the conflicts of European greed, competition, and benefit? We must steer clear or avoid permanent, basically forever lasting, alliances with any part of the world. We may create temporary alliances, so things that are short, only in extraordinary, that is, unusual, special, or extreme circumstances. Okay? So I think what he's getting at here is, I've reread this a second time. If I go down here into the box, I think that what he's getting at is this idea that the United States shouldn't really be involved in alliances because they're dangerous. So George Washington basically states that the United States should avoid any kind of alliance because it's dangerous to our health as a nation. You can see here that I'm giving one sentence, but it's a very specific sentence. right? I'm basically summarizing or stating what George Washington says. So the next question is, what fear motivates President Washington's point of view? So if his point of view is basically that we shouldn't join alliances because they're dangerous, this is where we have to explain sort of his fear or why he sees them as dangerous. So let's go on ahead and give this a go as well. Okay. Looks like we're seeing that pop in yellow. I'll have to fix that later. All right, so we're going to go on and say that George Washington finds alliances dangerous because. And if we go back to the reading, he talks about this idea of participation in foreign wars. He also talks about how, when we entangle ourselves in the greed, competition, and benefit of others, it runs the risk of dangerous things. But I'm really going to focus on this first one. Okay, so George Washington finds alliances dangerous because he believes that alliances can lead to foreign wars that the United States should not be involved in. Again, one sentence, pretty clear, pretty specific, and taken basically from this line here of what George Washington says. So explain if and how the document shows change in the United States' role in the world. If there is no change from neutrality, leave this box blank. So there's a key part of this where it says if there's a change from neutrality. In this case, George Washington is advocating neutrality, and this is document 1. We're not going to be able to see any change here, but you're definitely going to see some change in some of the future documents. So since he's basically talking about neutrality, it says to leave this box blank. For those that are doing the 3.5, okay, it says what event, circumstance, or historical context or situation surrounds this speech. This one doesn't really need to be a full sentence. I really just need to know what's going on when this speech is written. So if I go up here, all I know is that this is 1796. So I can kind of read between the lines and say, hey, America is a young nation. We were kind of just born not too long ago, and we're probably not the strongest nation in the world, which is why he's not advocating that we take our kind of young nation and ruin it by going and fighting somebody else's war. So that's essentially what I would put for this. Right? The context is sort of the birth of America, or when the United States is young and weak. That's sort of the context or the situation that surrounds this because of when it was sort of given, this speech. All the other speeches come from specific events or major events in history that most people would know if you're reading between the lines or looking at when the speech was given. So for the number 4, we have to explain how does this event, circumstance, or historical context, that is to say that this is when America is basically born, how does that explain why George Washington says what he says? Well, I could give an answer that looks something like this. George Washington was afraid of alliances and wanted the U.S. to remain neutral because. And so you can see that this first part is really just stating what I said up here in terms of what the main idea is, right? I have to explain why does he say what he says. So George Washington was afraid of alliances and wanted the U.S. to remain neutral because he was afraid that since the U.S. was young and not strong yet, fighting another country's war could weaken or destroy our nation. And again, the document doesn't really say this. I'm just taking a look at sort of when this was written and the fact that this is the birth of America and sort of when we're young and weak, and use that to explain that he's really afraid that we might weaken or destroy our country if we end up fighting somebody else's war. Okay, so you can see that there are a total of 7 documents. I've done number 1, so you're asked to do the next 6. Document number 2 is a speech from Woodrow Wilson when he declares neutrality in August of 1914, and this takes place during a very specific event. Again, just like before, you're asked to summarize the main idea of his speech, what fear is motivating his point of view, so whatever he says in the speech, what is sort of causing, or what is the why for him saying that. Next, you're going to explain if and how the document shows a change in the U.S.'s role in the world. If there is no change from neutrality, you can leave this box blank. And just like before for the 3-5, what event, circumstance, or historical context or situation was going on when this speech was given. And then last but not least, explain why this change does or does not occur. You're going to do the exact same thing for a speech by Senator Henry Cabot Lodge when he rejects the League of Nations in 1919. You can see the chart is identical. Then comes Document 4, which is the Neutrality Act, which is the law passed by Congress in August of 1935. Next, you get a speech by President Harry S. Truman in 1947. Again, you're basically just doing the same things. You're doing the same thing because you're asked to track and trace change over time. So for each document, you're asked the same thing so that you can see if a change occurs or not. Document 6 is President Lyndon B. Johnson's justification of U.S. intervention in Vietnam. This is from 1965. Again, same questions. And then the last is actually a map. And this is a map of all U.S. intervention around the world from 1945 to 2010. And so you can see this time there's only one question here, which is summarize the main idea or the purpose of the map above. And then everything else is the same from there. Once you've completed breaking down and analyzing all the documents, right, this is the parts or pieces where you start to develop an understanding when and how did things change. In the end, you're asked to put it all together. And you can see here that I've identified that this is really the majority of your score. This is where the biggest part of your score is going to come from. So I've broken it down here on what a 3, 3.5, and 4.0 looks like. So for a student who wants a 3, they've basically broken down all the documents, and in 7 to 8 sentences, they explain how America's role in the world changed over time, from George Washington's farewell speech in 1796 to the present, roughly 2010. For those who want a 3.5, in addition to completing these requirements for a 3, you're also going to identify the specific moments, events, or period within U.S. history where changes occur. So here's an example of what that might sound like. You might say, U.S. neutrality changed around Pearl Harbor. In this case, you're identifying a specific place or time in which a change occurs. You're not just saying what change happens, but when. A statement like this demonstrates deeper understanding of the material because you can identify when in history this change occurs. For those going for a 4.0, all of the requirements for a 3 and 3.5 are met. Okay? So you've basically explained what change happens and when it happens. Now in your final paragraph, you're also going to explain the causes, circumstances, and reasons behind the changes that you observed. So in the example for the 3.5 above, you don't just say change happens around the time of Pearl Harbor, but you go on and explain why a change happens at this time. So you might say something like this. U.S. neutrality changed around Pearl Harbor because is key. After being attacked and having American soldiers killed, Americans began feeling there was no other option than to get involved in World War II and join other countries to defeat Hitler and Japan. So basically, we've identified the change that happens, when it happens, and now we're starting to explain why it happens. How does this time or situation create a desire or why a change occurs? So this demonstrates a complete understanding, not just of change that happens, but also why it occurs. And so you can see that I've made a note here that additional research may be required to earn the 3.5 or the 4. Basically what you're going to do is in this text box, you're just going to start typing your answer. And when you're done, you're basically going to submit it to Empower just as you would anything else. Okay? I'm going to go on ahead and delete the rest of this. So basically it's your job to go through the remaining 6 documents, fill out the chart, 3 questions if you're aiming for a 3, 4 for a 3.5, and 5 for a 4. And then you're going to do that summative paragraph at the bottom, which is really where most of your grade is and is absolutely required. So that concludes our walkthrough of this 5th lesson on foreign policy shifts and America's evolving or changing role in the world. The next lesson will mainly be about cause and effect, and it should start out with World War I. What were the causes of World War I and the effects of World War I? If you remember back with the weapons project, I mentioned that we'd be coming back to this. Well, that time is now. I look forward to seeing you for our next lesson. Thank you for your time, and I hope that you found this video instructive.